So I started my career as a doctor in family medicine, and then I did 20 years in emergency medicine. And that was a great insight into life. I think being a doctor is a privilege that you get to see things and hear stories from people that they wouldn't normally tell you and that are very honest and very raw. And I have always been very interested in the human psyche, the way people think and the development of the human psyche. And this last period of time, these last 2 or 3 months, has been a break from me from my normal. I travel 8 or 9 months of the year and I'm always running around and busy. It's been very good for me to stop and to review some of the mentors who I have worked with in the past, some of the men who are important to me, like Michael Mead, who does tremendous work through Mosaic Voices, and the work of Robert Bly and Malidoma Some and Robert Moore, who wrote an amazing book, The Archetype of Initiation. And I've been looking through these things and watching online videos, and there are a few sort of things that I'm exploring at the moment that I think are very relevant and that I want to share with what we are talking about today. And the first, and I'm going to share my screen again, and I'm hoping that the share screen will work well. The first is that life is a series of transformations. Now, can I get a thumbs up that we can see that screen? Oh, I've got to be able to see people to get a thumbs up to do that. Yep, that's okay. And you're not seeing faces on the side of it? Okay, great. So life is a series of transformations. From the time that we are born until the time that we die, we go through changes. And let me see if I can get this to move on. So we start off as a baby, and then we move up and we become a small child. And a small child is different from a baby. And a small child thinks and acts and can do things that are different from a baby. And then we become a young adult. And hopefully from being a young adult, we move and we become a grown-up. And then eventually we may even become an elder. And along the way, we may become parents. And we have different relationships and we have different jobs. But all the time, things are changing in our lives. And at some point, our parents die, and that's a major transformation. And we are always going through these transformations. And one of the most important things, I look at it as if it's that there is a staircase, and we're all on this staircase. And the idea is to move up the staircase in the appropriate way. And one of the things that I have seen in my work is that we try to stop transformations. And one of the biggest ones we try to stop is people try to stay young, and people pretend that they're young. And we have songs saying forever young, and we have things that we can buy to be young. And my brother, who is a plastic surgeon, is booked out 2 years ahead to give people operations so that they can look, especially women, so they can look young. If we don't transform, it actually creates a problem. So I'm very interested in this idea of transformation and how we can create healthy transformation. And actually, I believe that rites of passage were created to keep and make sure that we go regularly through transformations so that our psyche keeps evolving. Otherwise, we can end up with adult men in their 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s, but who still think and act like boys or teenagers. And that is a big problem. And I have great concern about one of the things with the loss of rites of passage is that transformations they're not created and facilitated anymore by the community. And for some of us, they may not happen, or they happen in a very unhealthy way. So that's the first thing that I've been working with. The next thing that I've been working with, and I'll go back to share screen. Is this idea that we have what's called a horizontal and vertical imagination. I've just been doing some work through Michael Mead and looking at this, and I find this absolutely fascinating. This idea that there is a horizontal and a vertical imagination. And I'm going to explain that. So the horizontal imagination is what we're doing, what our plans are. So my horizontal imagination might be that I'm going to work 200 days of the year and I'm going to make a certain amount of money and I'm going to build a house and I'm going to go on a certain number of holidays and, you know, they're basically my plans. So that is my horizontal imagination. But my vertical imagination involves my soul and my spirit. And so my vertical imagination is what is my calling? What is my soul wanting to do? What is the purpose of my soul? Why am I here? And what is my spirit capable of doing together with my soul? And so I see it, and this is something that happens to me. I get very caught up in my horizontal imagination, and I can lose track of what's happening vertically. I lose track of my soul's calling and the gifts of my spirit. And when I lose track, I don't do well. And it's in those times that I have to come back and connect in with those things that are happening vertically, which are around my soul and my spirit. And this period of time, these last months, for me, and I think for everyone, has been an opportunity, and not everyone will have taken the opportunity, but there has been an opportunity to look beyond the horizontal. Because a lot of the things that we used to do, we haven't been able to do them in the same way. And we've had more time at home, more time with our families, more time to go inwards, rather than the madness and the craziness of the world that affects not everyone, but so many of us. So I'm very interested in this idea of a not only horizontal imagination, but also a vertical imagination. The next thing that I've been exploring is that, and I've already mentioned it, this idea that each of us have a soul and a spirit, and that we're in fact born with it. And it's not a universal belief that everyone has a soul and a spirit. In fact, there's this idea of the tabula rasa, which especially through the Catholic communities, and I may well offend someone at some point in my presentation, but I don't think it's a really good presentation unless you offend at least some people at some stage. And the tabula rasa, the theory of the tabula rasa is that we are all born blank, that we are born completely blank, and it is the role of our teachers and our parents and our elders to put things into us and tell us how to be. The alternative view on life, which is what the Indigenous and traditional communities believe, is that we're not born blank, that we're actually born with a soul and with a spirit. And the interesting thing, and by the way, I believe in that we are born with a soul and a spirit. And I'm also interested in stories, and especially the stories that are similar from lots of different cultures. And there are many stories from Africa and Asia and Australian Aboriginal stories that talk about this idea that we have a soul and a spirit. But one of the things that they have in common is that when we're actually born, something happens that makes us forget what our soul is. We forget. So we come into the world, and it's within our soul that our gifts are held. So let's say I have a gift that gets given to me before I'm born, and this gift is something that I can bring to the world, and it's in me, but for some weird, beautiful, crazy reason, before I get born, I forget what it is. It's still in me, but I forget what it is. And so I need to spend a considerable part of my life trying to find that gift so that I can bring it out to the world. And so as we grow, we have this combination of the gifts that are within us. And by the way, you can often see it in your children. All of our children are born differently. I have 2 sons and 5 stepchildren, and they're all from babies, I could tell, completely different. Some of them, one was really good at singing, another one's great at mathematics, another one asks questions the whole time, another one is very kind and compassionate and caring, but they're all different. So when they're young, we as their parents, we can see a lot more clearly what their gifts are, which is a representation of their soul. But as they grow older and more things get put into them, and more sort of pressure from society to be a certain way comes in, it's like those gifts get buried again. So at some point in their lives, we have to do something to support our children, and not just our boys, but our girls as well, to rediscover, to find what is in them, what are the gifts that they bring, so their gifts can be given to the community. Because a gift is only a gift if you give it to someone. It's not a gift if we hold on to it. And so I have this belief that we have this soul which has gifts, and part of our responsibility as men is to help other men and the young ones in our communities and our families to find and be comfortable with the fact that they have gifts, and that these gifts are actually critically important for the good of the community. And then the last thing that I have been working with is that COVID-19 is in fact a global rite of passage. It is a rite of passage. And I have spent much of my life much of my professional life studying rites of passage and looking at the elements of a rite of passage. And I believe that if we can understand what a rite of passage is and how COVID-19 is a rite of passage, that will greatly help our ability to work with it and to know what we can do and how we can support others in a place of leadership. Because normally a rite of passage would in fact be facilitated by elders within the community. However, we don't have those elders. We don't have the experience. We don't have the leaders who can say to us, hey, we know what's going on in this time and we can help guide you through it. There are a few, but there are not many, which means that all of us as men, I believe, have a responsibility to try and understand what's going on so that we can help ourselves and we can help others. So I'm going to spend a few minutes now just explaining about the elements of a rite of passage. And as we do that, we can overlay and see how the what's happening with COVID-19 is in fact a rite of passage. So all rites of passage have the same core stages. And the first thing about a rite of passage is that they are a transformation. They are something that change us from one stage in life to the next. And we will all be changed as a result of what's going on. And so we change in a rite of passage. We change from one thing to the next. And the classic rite of passage in nature is the caterpillar becoming a butterfly. But the first stage of a rite of passage is a separation from our normal everyday life, from the places that we normally go and the things that we normally do. And we have certainly, in this period of time, separated from our normal lives. We're not working in the same way. We're not, we're doing this by Zoom rather than everybody getting together. We can't travel, lots and lots of things. So we have separated, and we have actually gone into a container. And in the example I'm showing of the caterpillar that becomes a butterfly, the caterpillar separates from its normal life, which is on a tree eating leaves and everything like that, and it goes into a container, which is a cocoon. And then while it's in that place, in that container, it goes through a transformation, and then eventually it will integrate and come back into the community in a different way. So they are the three stages of a rite of passage: a separation into a container, followed by a transformation, and then eventually an integration back into the community. And we are just moving into that integration stage at the moment. We're all starting to come out of our containers and have a look around. And, some of you may have read the book Iron John by Robert Bly, and he talks about the young hunter who goes into the forest and goes down into the lake and spends time in the mud of the lake, and then reintegrates eventually and comes back out. This is a story that is shared in many, many cultures and in many, many different ways. And my study has been around what are the things that need to happen within the transformation for a rite of passage to occur in a healthy way. Because, by the way, I just need to say, we will all transform in our lives. We will move from one stage to the next. We will move from being boys to being men, to being parents or elders. Those things will happen. The question is, will they happen in a healthy way, or will they happen to us? And when I run my Rites of Passage leadership trainings, and I ask people to tell me, what was the event? What was it that transformed you from being a boy to a man, or a girl to a woman? And my hope is that people will tell me about, a healthy process that got facilitated by elders and involved the community and all of those things. But 98% of the time, what people tell me is actually a highly traumatic experience. My rite of passage, when I moved from being a boy to a man, didn't happen until I was 27 years old. And I had two children who were 1 and 3, and they were both still wearing nappies. And my wife, who was from overseas, from Canada, left. And she went back to Canada, and at 27 years of age, I found myself as a single father with 2 boys in nappies. And that was when I had to move from being a boy to a man. That's when I had to put someone else in front of me and prioritize them. And that was very traumatic and very difficult. And that was the period that I consider when I moved from being a boy to a man, because there was no rite of passage for me when I was a teenager. So the elements that would happen in a healthy rite of passage in the transformation would be that people would leave the environment they're in and go into a container, as we have done. And by the way, rites of passage are not just for boys becoming young men. They happen, as I've said, at all stages of our lives. So the first element within a rite of passage is the sharing of stories. And stories are used as a way of passing on wisdom and knowledge, and they're used as a way of building communities. And hopefully in this period, we have had an opportunity with our families and through Zoom and other things to share our stories. And one of the beautiful things about Mansign, about European Men's Gathering, about these events that we do, is that we have a chance to share our stories and to listen to the stories of men. So the next thing that's always in a healthy rite of passage is a challenge. And it's from these challenges that the opportunities arise. In fact, they say that it's when the most extreme challenges happen that we have the greatest opportunity for growth. Growth and change doesn't happen when everything's going really well. Growth and change tend to happen during times of challenge. The next stage of any healthy rite of passage is creating a vision for the future. How do we want to be when we come out of this space? And I'm very interested that, given that all of us have been in a container and we're going to come out soon, we're going to move back into communities, what is our vision for how we want to be? And what I can say is that if we end up as we were before, we will have missed an incredible opportunity. It would be a big shame. The aim is not to get back to normal again. The aim is not to get back to how life was before this epidemic started. The aim is to work out what are the things that we want to take forward, what are the things that we want to leave behind. What is our vision for how we want to be in the future? And then I've been doing lots of webinars and talking to lots of people about it. And one of the things I say is, if you're not sure about what to change, to look at, what's been right in your face? What are the things that have really come up for you during this period? And many, many people I've spoken to, it's been around family and relationships. Relationships at home, relationships with partners, relationships with children, relationships with parents. And certainly that's been a big one for me. And in many families, children who've already moved out of home have come back for these 2 or 3 months. So for each person, the challenges will be different. But if you think about what's been the most difficult, what's really confronted you in these last 2 or 3 months, they are the things, they are the challenges. And it's from those challenges that we can create the opportunities and the vision for the future. And I really hope and urge people to spend a serious amount of time thinking about, what do you not want to do when you come out of lockdown that you were doing before? And they actually have done some surveys around the world, and 91% of people said they don't want life to be exactly as it was before. And I know for me, one of the big things that I don't want is the madness and the craziness. For me, it's the busyness. So if you think about the things in your life that were mad before this lockdown started, they are the things that you don't want to go back to. And I don't want to go back to the amount of work I was doing and the number of planes I was catching and the running around I was doing. Very much for me, I want to be more at home, more with family, and more settled rather than running around the whole time. So we want to create our vision for how we come out of lockdown. And then the final thing that is so important in the transformation stage of a rite of passage is a recognition, and a recognition of the gifts, the spirit of the people who have been with you. And when I talked about this idea that every person has a soul that has gifts, and that those gifts are for the community, what we need to be doing is recognizing those gifts. And so one of the things that I would really recommend is that your children, your family, the people you've been spending time with, that you take a moment, take more than a moment, take some time to talk to them and to tell them about the things that you admire about them, the things that you respect, the things that you're proud of, and the things that you love, the gifts that you see within them. Because these transformations that I've been talking about through our lives are actually a transformation of our psyche. So the way a baby thinks will be different to how a child thinks, will be different to how a young adult thinks, will be different to how a grown-up thinks, and will be different to how an elder thinks. And so the psyche and the spirit needs to transform, and the gifts that the soul brings will come out in a different way at different stages through a person's life. And we have to help them to recognize what their gifts are. And they will hopefully help us to recognize what our gifts are. So the gifts that I have today are different from the gifts that I had 20 or 30 years ago to bring out, and may well be different from the gifts that I will have to bring out 20, 30 years from now if I'm still around. So I really encourage you, especially if you've got a family at home, to spend some time with the family, and you can even make a special occasion, and it might be a meal or it might be an activity, and talk about what's happened during this period and the challenges. Ask people to share their visions for how they want to be in the future when they go back to work or school or where they go, and absolutely spend some time where each person, one at a time, hears from the others within the family about what we're proud of and what we love about them and the gifts that we see that they have. Okay, so I've also talked a lot in my work, and I've written about in my book, The Making of Men. I started my work with boys and this idea of boys becoming men. And that's still my passion, because I believe if we can create rites of passage for boys to become healthy men, then that will change their lives. And in fact, a lot of the first part of my career, I was working with men who hadn't gone through that rite of passage and were still acting as boys. And I wrote a model about the difference between boys and men. And I've now expanded that model, and I'm going to show it to you. And I want to challenge all of us with this model. So I'm going to go back to share screen. And I'm going to talk first. Oh, let's go share. Here we go. Oh, going the wrong way. Stay with me. Okay. So this is what I would call are the characteristics of a boy. And when I say a boy, this is a 6 to 10-year-old boy. So a boy thinks he's the center of the world, the center of the universe, and he needs someone to give him acknowledgement all of the time. And if he can't get acknowledgement for doing something good, he will do something bad, but he needs that continual acknowledgement. A boy thinks that other males are competition, so he's competitive with everyone, and he wants power. And he wants more power. He wants all the power he can get. A boy thinks he will live forever. He thinks he's always right. If something goes wrong, it's always someone else's fault. A boy is ruled by his emotions. If he doesn't get what he wants, he has a temper tantrum. And that can be quite violent, but when a 6-year-old does it, we just go, oh, it's a temper tantrum. And a boy wants a mother, and he wants a mother to do everything for him and to tell him how wonderful he is and everything like that. So that is typical boy behavior. Now, I still probably have all of those behaviors come out in me at times. And I'm interested if people would like to write in the chat box if there's any particular behavior that you recognize in yourself that is still boy behavior. So we should all be able to write at least 1 or 2 things, but it'd be great if some people wrote some things where they see that they still, yeah, so a few people who are always right. I have one around still wanting a mother sometimes. I want my girlfriend to be my mother. Never works well. Someone else wants a mother. I'm not the only one. People rule by their emotions. Great. So a big part of my work has been around getting men, all of us, to see the places in ourselves that we are still boys. And so then I wrote a model around, if I'm going to talk about what it is to be a boy, what does it mean to be, what's a man? How do we define a man? And the way that we've been working on, and these are principles, but a man actually understands, as a man, I understand that I'm not the center of the world, I'm part of the world. And I do what I believe is right. I don't do it so someone will acknowledge me. I do it even if no one's watching, because it's the right thing to do. And I work together with other men. And power is for the good of the community. It's not just for me, it's for the good of the community. And as a man, I know that I'm mortal. I'm going to die one day. It actually affects how I'm going to live my life. And as a man, I can admit when I'm wrong. Very important to be able to admit when we are wrong, rather than always trying to say that we're right. As a man, I can stand with my emotions. So if I don't get what I want, I can't just have a temper tantrum and hit someone or swear at someone. That's actually domestic violence. I'm allowed to be angry, but I'm not allowed to hit someone or swear at them. And as a man, I don't want a mother. I want relationship with the feminine in whatever way that is. And so a big part of the work that I've done from now is showing these models and going, okay, where are we still boys and how can we move more and more into the man place? And rather than pretending that I'm always, me personally, in the man place, I'm not. But my aim is to spend less time in the boy model and more time in the man model. And even more, to know when I really need to step up and be a man. And that model has worked extremely well. And especially when I show women, when I give talks, and sometimes there's hundreds of people there, and I say to the women, do any of you know any men who still act like boys, who still think they're the center of the universe and who want power and who don't take responsibility for their actions and always have to be right and who want a mother? And for a lot of the women, they sort of look at their husbands and they look back and it's a bit of an embarrassing moment. And unfortunately, I see a lot of women believing that their partners are still boys or act like boys. And so we've been using this model, and for a lot of us men, it's, you know, this is just one of the frameworks that we can use. But I've now moved on from that in a way. And it's great to be saying, okay, as men, the best thing that we can do is less boy behavior and more man behavior. Because I think, and especially now that we're in a time of crisis, we actually need to go to the next level. And for me, I've become very interested in, what does it mean to be an elder? How is an elder different from a man? And so if we have our model of a man, what is an elder? And I've just written this model in the last few weeks. So I'm very interested in feedback. And if you disagree with things or you have other things that you want to add, please write on the thing or send it to me, because I want to develop this model well. But the model of what an elder is, I can get to it. An elder looks after the world and he mentors people to find what is right for them to do. An elder helps others find their purpose and gives his wisdom to the community. An elder understands that death is necessary and can accept it. For an elder, it's no longer about right and wrong. For an elder, love is the main emotion. And an elder honors and respects the duality of the masculine and feminine in all things. And in this time of crisis, we need elders. And we have men in this group in their 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s. And one of the biggest things that is lacking at the moment is healthy eldership. And it's so interesting that the ones who are dying during this COVID period are the old people who should be the elders, and some of whom are elders. But by the way, you're not just an elder because of how old you are. Elder is a verb. You have to be an elder. And in this time, we need elders. And I'll go back to it. I'll show all the three things together. The boy to man to elder, where we move from being the center of the world to part of the world to looking after the world. We move from competition to collaboration to helping others find their purpose. We move from thinking we're going to live forever to actually understanding that death is necessary and we can accept it. We move from being always right to doesn't even matter about right and wrong. We move from emotions to love. And we move from wanting a mother to honouring and respecting the duality of the masculine and feminine in everything. And my challenge to all of us, and at 56, as I'm just moving and sort of seeing that this eldership is in front, is to look at not only what boy behaviours we need to leave behind, but very importantly, what elder behaviours can we bring in? And I'm going to see if I can type into the chat box here. I've got to get it to be, here we go, to everyone. I'm about to put in a link. Yeah, that link will take you to the boy to man to elder model that I just showed you. And my challenge in this time of crisis, my challenge as we are working out how do we not only manage ourselves, it's not enough just to manage ourselves. How do we genuinely support our families? How do we genuinely support our communities? How do we genuinely have an impact in the greater society? How can we move into eldership? Because one of the things that's come up for me in this exploration of elders, we all know that there is a crisis in the young. You only have to look at their mental health levels and the number of children who are committing suicide and the risk-taking behaviours and the drugs and all the problems. So everybody knows that there's a problem with young people at the moment. What we talk about a lot less is that there is this bigger crisis amongst the elders. The rates of depression, the rates of suicide, the isolation and the loneliness is enormous amongst the elders. And actually now, unfortunately, many of them are dying, or too many are dying with COVID. So they're under threat in a whole nother level. But we know there's a crisis with the young, and we know I'm saying there's a crisis with the elders. But what we very rarely talk about is that those two things are actually linked. And that if we can find a right way to connect the elders with the young, we will benefit both of them. Because when the elders and the young get together, for the young, they gain wisdom and knowledge. So young people don't want to listen to their own parents, but they will listen to grandparents. They will listen to elders. They will hear the stories of the elders. And elders love to tell stories. So the elders can support the young through passing on their wisdom and knowledge. And they will also listen to the young. And the young people need to be listened to. And often the parents struggle to do that for all sorts of different reasons. And it's also the elders who are supposed to be creating the rites of passage for the young. So there's an enormous role for elders in our community. And because we've taken those things away, so many of our elders are actually going away on holiday. They're leaving, or they've got their new car, or in Australia they go travelling. But actually, they have a very important role with the young. And then the benefit to the elders when the young spend time with them is the elders get energy, which is something that they need. And the elders also get passion and purpose, and they no longer feel lonely because they have the young in their lives. And one of the best examples of this is grandparents and grandchildren. And there is a saying that grandparents and grandchildren have a special bond. They have a special connection. And one of the reasons they have that special connection is because they have a common enemy. And I'll let you work out who that is. But I see it with my father, who's 90 years old, and his grandchildren, some of whom are 10 and 12 years old. And my father, when the grandchildren are there, my father, who's 90 and can hardly walk, is rolling around on the ground with the children. And he will have bought things to teach them. And he'll have books and microscopes and artwork. And the children love their grandfather. And they'll listen to him and they'll ask him to share stories. And there's joy when they're together. And my parents will talk for a week more about how beautiful it was to have the grandchildren visit. And the grandchildren will go away with all this new knowledge and things that they can do. And so I'm very interested, and I think one of the places that our men's work is going to go is not only creating more rites of passage for our boys so that they can go create a healthy shift into becoming good young men, but that we also need to be creating a way of bringing the elders back into the community. Because if we don't have the elders, the system doesn't work. And one of the things that I've noticed also more and more is that when you separate the different ages in our community and you have them just together only with their own age, that creates a problem. So I went to a big music festival last year, and they asked me to give a talk as to whether this music festival was a rite of passage. And there were thousands of people at the music festival, but all the people there were between 20 and 30 years old. So it was just one part of the community. There were no children and there were no elders. And after about 2 or 3 days, the area where they were camping started to become like a rubbish dump. And there was things on the ground and there were flies and it smelled and there were beer bottles and cans and cigarette butts, and it was really disgusting. And then after that, I went to another music festival, and at this different festival, there was also thousands of people, but it was a family festival, and there was everyone from children up to elders. And when I would walk around the festival in the early morning, the children would be sleeping and someone would be looking after them. And someone else would be sweeping and looking after the tents and setting things up. And the elders had a role. And the community worked well because it had all the different people working together. And if you go into an old people's home, which is just old people, what's the first thing you notice, or I notice, is the smell. It doesn't smell well. It's not healthy because you've just got elders together. So everything that we can be doing when we create and we have the children and the adults and the elders and everyone together, then we actually set up and create a system that works. And I think one of the big things that's come up in this COVID period with families coming together is us realizing how far many of us are from that system where we have everyone together. And I think that is also one of our great opportunities from this period of time to look at how we are in family and how we can be bringing the different groups together. And I see someone's written that this is people live more in Southern Europe. That's right. And they do it for a reason. The elders don't get sent off to old people's homes. They stay at home. You know, it's interesting, just quickly, and then I'm going to see if there's a couple of questions we want to ask. My mother, who's in the hospital, 89 years old, and I'm sort of wondering, how long will they keep just treating her, and will they let her go at any time? And then I spoke to, I have an adopted son in Sri Lanka, and they're quite a poor family, and the grandmother died 2 weeks ago. And I said to my adopted son, I said, oh, was she in hospital? And he said, no, she was just at home, and she's been in bed for about 2 months, and the family's been looking after her and feeding her and taking her to the toilet, and she just died at home, surrounded by the family, rather than in a hospital with, you know, everything going on. So I think there's a lot that we can learn from all of this. So I have my final share screen. And I'll see if I can move it forwards. Back to the transformations. Oh, now if I can go backwards, don't know if I can. This is where we can get information. I'll come back to that at the end. But I do have time for one or two questions. If people, thank you, David, for your comments. David Bierman, nice to have you on the call, mate. I feel very honoured. Are there people who would like to ask questions? I have about 10 minutes and I'd be very happy to answer some questions about what we're talking about. And my hope, and I always say this, is that we can bring Rites of Passage, which are a community event. Rites of Passage involve the whole community. And if we can bring Rites of Passage back through organisations like Manzine and Manifesto and through European men's gatherings, I know there are some good men around Europe now doing Rites of Passage, doing father-son programs, father-daughter programs, there are mother-daughter programs happening. So if people are interested, please get in touch with us through the Rites of Passage Institute and I can send it to you. So someone's asked the question, is it possible to change society without having to put bigger political changes in place? Well, it's a great question. I have a major fear that if we wait for political changes to happen, it won't happen. And I think we have a responsibility to actually be creating these things because we know it's the right thing to do. And we've been setting up Rites of Passage in Australia and around the world for 25 years now. And we've had over 250,000 people come through not only our programs, but the programs run by the people that we have trained. So my hope is that political changes will come eventually, but it's actually going to start by men like you and me and the other men that we know saying we need to be doing something for our boys, we need to be doing something for our elders, and that when we do that, it will grow and spread. And the other thing I need to say is I talked about this staircase and that we're all on the staircase. And very important point is that for a boy to become a man, his father and his mother also need to step up to the next level in their lives. So Rites of Passage don't just happen for one person moving one stage on the staircase. when a rite of passage happens in properly, everybody on the staircase moves up a step. So when my sons go through or went through their rite of passage, I had to move from being a father who sort of told them what to do and knew everything that was happening. I had to move up a step and give them space to make their own decisions. But also in moving up that step, I had to realize I'm moving towards eldership and I'm moving away from being young. I'm moving away from being strong in the way that I was. And so that's part of my rite of passage, to be letting go of certain things, but moving towards other things. Okay. What do you recommend an adult man acting like a boy to develop in direction of a man? Well, that is a great question also. And I think one of the beautiful things about conferences like this and men's gatherings when we get together is we actually have an opportunity to have these discussions. And these gatherings we have, they have the elements of a rite of passage. We have separated from our normal lives and we come into a container. And hopefully when we're on these gatherings, we're not using our mobile phones and all of that, and we are sitting with men and we are hearing stories and we're sharing our own stories and we are challenging ourselves and we're being challenged and we're creating a vision for the future. And if we're also being recognized and someone shares with us the gifts that they see in us, then that will help us move to the next stage. And if you have a man who's still acting like a boy, he may not go to one gathering and go straight from being like a teenager to being a fully grown man, but he will move. When we go to these conferences, when we do this work, we move. When we create our own processes, we move. And the idea is to keep creating them so that we can all be moving. And I look at it like there's this staircase and there's this big mess of people all over the place. And parts of us are evolved and parts of us are still like when we're teenagers. But every time we do a rite of passage, we sort of move people more towards the staircase of where they're supposed to be on it. And if we can bring regular rites of passage into our worlds, that's why we don't just go to the European men's gathering or man sign once. We keep going year after year, because every time we grow, every time we go, we have an opportunity to grow. Someone said, the second point of the elder is without the need for acknowledgement. Yes, Mark, an elder does not need acknowledgement. Definitely. Okay, there's a question here about if it's not possible to make a connection between the grandparents and grandchildren, is there a way to build comparable connection with other elders? This is such an important question. And it continues not only to the grandparents, but it also is so important for those of us who don't have active fathers in our lives or children in our lives. And I have said for many years now that when we do this work, we're not only here for our own boys, but we're here for all the boys. And so I think as men, we have a responsibility to not only father our own son, but to bring that father and that elder energy to all the boys that we know. So it's like we have an umbrella of man energy, grown-up man energy that is available for the boys, because some boys, their fathers are absent, or they don't know their fathers, or their fathers don't connect with them. And if that boy is therefore doesn't have that, are we going to say, oh, well, bad luck, that boy missed out? And I very much believe, and I've seen it through our work, and it comes into this idea of mentoring, that all of us men have to be doing whatever we can for all of the boys. So if I go down the street and I see a boy on his skateboard, I'll always say to him, hey, show us your best trick. And he'll do whatever he does. And I'll say, that's fantastic, mate. Or if I'm out surfing, because I'm a surfer, and I see one of the boys doing something good on a wave, when he comes back out, I'll say, hey, I saw you do that. That was really good. They need to be seen. And all of us men, they don't have to be our own sons to see them. They could be complete strangers. And same with the elders. If we can find ways, if the grandparents are not available, but we can find healthy ways to bring elders in, which we can do, because there are elders out there, then we do everybody a service. Okay, I might do one more question. There's a question about working as a male nurse in a team with many women. Well, I think it's a great question to finish with because it's a tricky question, but I think if we come at it as a man or even as an elder, whether it's men, whether it's women, our aim has to be in any team to be bringing the best out of everyone in the team. And that there's a I could do a whole nother lecture starting now on leadership, that actually the best form of, and the evolution of leadership over time, and that one of the healthiest forms of leadership is to be recognizing and bringing out the gifts that are in the people in your team, whether they're men or whether they're women or whether it's a mix, and that a team will function the best when we can recognize all of those gifts. Working in a team is never easy, whether it's same gender, different gender, mixed gender. But if we stay with the principle of what do I see in these people and how can I let them know that I see that in them, in my experience, that has brought out the best in the teams that I have worked in.